The email I was reading felt like poison. Suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my life had come crashing down. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I just stared at the email with no idea about how this could have happened and what it meant for me. You may be wondering what this email was and why it had such a life-changing impact on me. Well, let me backtrack a bit. You see, there was this awesome exchange program that my school was doing with a school in China, and for as long as I can remember, I've been obsessed with the Far East. Anyway, I was dying to go on this trip, and because my grades were pretty good, I qualified for a scholarship. My mom wasn't exactly rolling in cash, but because it was all paid for, she couldn't say no, right? The problem was that I needed a passport. Yep, I was 14 and I didn't have a passport. I hadn't thought it was that weird before, but now that I had to go through the whole process of applying for one, it made me wonder why my mom hadn't done it when I was a kid, like everyone else's parents had done. The list of documents needed for a passport was so long, and because I was only 14, I needed my mom's birth certificate and her ID and stuff. The trip was in a month, so I needed to apply quickly if I wanted to get it in time. Mom was seriously not keen for me to go. She kept saying that I was too young. What if something happened to me? Or what if the plane crashed? She was being so annoying. Why couldn't she just hand over her certificates to me? Why make it so difficult? If I'd had a dad, it would have been a lot easier. I could have just used his ID. But I never knew my dad, and he already died, so that wasn't even an option. I kept begging my mom to let me go, and then one evening, she started sobbing and explained the real reason why I wouldn't be able to go. Her birth certificate had been lost in a fire when she was a young girl, and she'd never applied for a new one. She said it was really tricky to get a new one, and it could take months, and she didn't want to let me down, so she had kept this from me. To be honest, it just seemed so irresponsible to me. It was already bad enough that all the other kids at school teased me about my mom, without adding this to the pile too. The thing is, my mom is really old, like grandma old. I've always been teased about it because my mom had me when she was 50, so now she's like 64, but she looks way older. I asked her about it once and she looked a bit upset, but then she said she just aged quicker than other people because she'd had a tough life and that raising a child as a single mom wasn't easy. I couldn't miss this trip. It meant so much to me. I needed to come up with a plan. If Mom won't get a new birth certificate, then I just have to find another way. I started Googling fake birth certificates. I never expected it to bring up any results, but it did. And there was even an email address for some guy who did this. How was this even legal? Well, I didn't really care about that. All I wanted was to go on the trip. I decided to email him. I told him what I needed, I sent him Mom's date of birth and the town she was born in. And then I waited. A whole week went by and I heard nothing. I was getting so impatient, and at this rate, my dream of going to China would never happen. I was sitting in the basement one night when my phone lit up. It was the fake certificate guy. He'd emailed back. I could barely contain my excitement as I opened up the email. I saw he'd attached something and I knew it must have been the fake certificate. I clicked on it and waited for it to download. There it was. Yes, I thought. I could easily get my passport now. I went to email him back to say thank you, and that's when I noticed he'd written me an email. I read it and felt my blood run cold. Dear Clarissa, thank you for your email. I'm afraid I don't offer my services to minors, and as you can see, your mom already has a fake birth certificate. In fact, she contacted me about 15 years ago to get one made, so perhaps you should speak to her about it. I hope this doesn't cause any problems. All the best, Mr. Blackthorpe. I didn't understand. Why had my mom had a fake birth certificate made? This made no sense. Why had she lied to me? And 15 years ago? That was just before I was born. So many questions were running through my mind as I ran up the stairs to speak to her. She was in the kitchen cooking, and I stormed in there, giving her the fright of her life. You liar! I screamed at her. I didn't even wait for her to react. I ran out into the garden and opened the email again. Then I looked closer at the birth certificate. It really was my mom's. The next moment I looked up and my mom was walking towards me. Before I could say anything more, my mom interrupted me, and that's when things got a whole lot worse. Clarissa, it's not what you think. I just hid it there because I didn't want you to know my real age. Now it was my turn to interrupt her. Wait, what? I said. The suitcase. I know it looks bad, all those documents, but I didn't have a choice. How else could I have had a baby? The doctors wouldn't exactly let a 64-year-old give birth, she said between sobs. She was crying a lot, and I just stared at her. What was she talking about? Suddenly, I felt like we weren't on the same page at all. I have no idea what suitcase you're going on about, but do you remember a Mr. Blackthorpe, Mom? I said, almost spitting my words out in anger. Mom's face went ghostly white, and that's when she realized the mistake she just made. I couldn't even bear to be around her. I started walking away from her, feeling disgusted, and then as I reached the garden gate, I turned around to her and said, "You know what, Mom? You're the most selfish person I've ever met. How could you lie to me all these years? If you had me when you were 64, that means you're 78 now. Do you know how messed up that is? You're even older than all my friends' grandmas. Why wait so long? You should never have even had me." I could hear Mom crying out to me as I walked through the gate, but I didn't care. I needed to get as far away from her as possible. But what she said then sent shivers up my spine. "Clarissa, please. Don't go. I dreamt about having a child like you for 64 years. When you were born, you gave me a reason to keep on living. Without you, I wouldn't have survived this long." I turned around to face her. There were tears running down her cheeks, and she looked so small and frail standing next to the tree. She was 78. This was crazy. "Please let me explain," she begged. If it hadn't been for what she just said, I'd have run away. But the thought of her being so old, it killed me. Then she told me her whole story. Ever since she was a young girl, she dreamt of having a child, but she'd just never met the right guy. The clock was ticking, and one day she woke up and she was 40, and her panic really set in, so she decided to freeze her eggs and wait for a donor to come along. But no donor ever came, and by then it was too late anyway. Menopause had come and gone, and the next thing, she was waking up and it was her 60th birthday. She couldn't take it any longer. After 3 years of searching and searching, she found a Swedish man who was willing, but there was just one tiny problem. Absolutely no doctor would agree to do this kind of procedure on a 63-year-old, and so she did what any desperate person would, just like me. She contacted a certain Mr. Blackthorpe and had a fake certificate made. The whole time she was telling me this, she was crying and shaking. I just stared at her and listened. I was so shocked. I couldn't believe she'd done this. First, she had lied about her age, then she'd lied about me having a dad who died, and now the lies just kept on coming. What would be next? I was so angry with her. I couldn't stand there any longer listening to all these lies. I ran back into the garden towards the house, barging past her, and went straight to my room. I didn't want to be anywhere near her. My mom knew better than to come and look for me. How could she have been so selfish? She was 78. That meant she could die in a few years, and then what? I'd be left all alone. It's not like I could even go look for my father. He was just some anonymous donor from Sweden. It all made sense now. The reason my mom was so against me getting a passport. If the authorities find out she'd used a fake certificate all those years ago, she could be in serious trouble. She could even go to prison. Honestly, she was the most selfish person I'd ever met. I felt so trapped. I couldn't go on my trip, and I felt like I'd be stuck in this house forever, all because of some stupid lie she'd told so she could have a baby. I refused to speak to her. Days went by, and still I wouldn't even look at her. One morning, I was lying on my bed thinking about it all when something was slipped under my door. It was my mom's original birth certificate. I realized that day after school I had my passport appointment. I'd completely forgotten about it, but maybe I could still go and get it. I was still so angry at my mom that I didn't even care about the consequences. That day at school dragged by. We had a substitute teacher for our literature class, and she really bugged me at first. She was so bubbly and positive, and I just wasn't in the mood for everything she kept saying. She even wrote a quote on the board that said, "Enjoy life while you can. It can be taken in a heartbeat." I barely listened in the class, but I couldn't stop staring at the quote. It was getting under my skin. As we left the class, the teacher said, "Don't forget to chase your dreams. Chase them hard." I went to my locker to get my stuff and headed towards the door. It was time for my appointment. I climbed onto my bicycle and suddenly I couldn't even pedal. What was I doing? This wasn't right. I knew what I had to do. I kept thinking about what my mom had said about me giving her a reason to live. I cycled home so fast that when I saw my mom sitting by the window, I burst into tears. No trip in the world was worth losing my mom over. I ran through the door and went straight over to her and gave her the biggest hug ever. The trip could wait. The most important thing was that my mom was safe. I would never be able to live with myself if I got her in trouble. I was her dream. She'd waited her whole life for me to come along, and I wasn't about to throw it all away for her. If I had to wait 4 more years until I turned 18 and could apply for my own passport, then so be it. After that, my relationship with my mom changed for the better. I appreciated every single moment with her now because I know how long she waited for me. I don't know how much time we have left together, but I just want to make the most of it. And as for Mr. Blackthorpe, I guess I'm grateful in a way. Without him, I wouldn't be here today, and I also wouldn't have learned the truth about my mom. What do you think of my story? Please share your comments below and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories.